Welcome to the Combative Nerds Podcast. Join us while we break balls and try to outwit each other at every turn while debating all things nerdom and trying to make sense of this world. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Raiderlance, and I am again by myself. I'm going to be giving you another update to the Andrew Tate case, and then we're going to be focusing a lot on his new attorney, Tina Glandian. Housekeeping, let's get it out of the way. Like, subscribe, share this content. If you're a new listener, we apologize that we're audio. We're doing a hard transition to video in the next month. Give us some time and be patient with us. Now, as for me, I'm kind of in a mood. I caught another cold, ripping around my family again. So I'm chewing on a little gum. I apologize if I stutter, if I cough, those type of things. I'll try to edit it out. So I have a lot of information for you guys on the Andrew Tate case, a lot of updates. I'm going to be talking a little bit fast. I'm going to be ripping through it. I'm going to do my best to give you a lawyer's perspective on factual, objective-based presentation of what's going on. And then after I give you the facts, if I have a little spin or a little take on it, I'll give them to you. If you are new, if you didn't catch part one, pause it right here. Go about, about 4 or 5 videos down in our video playlist. Happened about a week ago where we did part one to this. We gave a timeline of the entire case. We gave an outline of the entire presentation. This is part 2. So we're going to jump to about point 7. I'll go through it real quick, and then we'll go into it in detail. February 1st, Tina Glandian had a press conference. She had a Piers Morgan appearance, and then the Tates and their angels appeared in the Bucharest court to appeal their preventive detention second time. Okay, so then later on February 1st, the Tates, the angels appeared in front of the Bucharest court where their appeal was denied, meaning that their second preventative detention would remain in place. Okay, then on February 2nd, the Daily Mail had an article where they discussed the Bucharest Court of Appeals ruling to deny the Tates appeal and how a psychologist report of 2 of the Tates female employees factored into that ruling. Then on February 15th, there were some leaked wiretaps from girls, and this was tweeted out by a supporter of the Tates, Tam Khan. We're going to just lightly go over that. I want to save it for part 3. February 19th, BBC article discussed that Andrew Tate's legal team sent a cease and desist letter to an accuser back in December. In that communication, he threatened legal action for defamation, slander, and a whole lot of money in damages. On February 21st, the Bucharest Tribunal granted the prosecutor's plea to keep the Tates brothers in custody for an additional 30 days. That would now make it 90 days worth. So that is now going to be the second 30-day preventative detention extension that was granted. Here's a caveat. Georgiana and Luana, who are the Tate's angels, were granted bail and allowed to be placed under house arrest. Then on February 24th, Tina Glandian makes another appearance on the Patrick Bet Davis podcast. We'll go over the highlights there. And then on February 27th, a BBC article discusses how the Romanian court rejected the appeal against the Tates' continued detention, ruling that they should remain into custody until March 29th. And the 2 women who were released on house arrest, Georgiana and Luana, they were ordered back into detention. All right, so we're going to try to rip through all of those things in a little bit more detail. All right, so let's go back to the first one. February 1st, 2023, Tina Glandian had a press conference. It was a 24-minute press conference done in English, translated to Romanian, and the journalist did not have any microphone, so it was really rough to hear. Now, for anybody listening who wants to follow along, check the description. I'm going to post all the links, all the evidence, all the citations. I'm an attorney. That's what we do. And I think you should be able to watch it objectively on your own instead of just through my lens. So Tina Glandian, what she did is she gave an opening statement and then answered, about like 12, 13 questions. I'll highlight the important ones. I'm going to read a lot of her opening statement. All right. So she stated that she appeared in the court with a Romanian legal defense team, and they made extensive arguments pointing out the lack of evidence against the Tate brothers. The Tate brothers took turns addressing the court. They were forthcoming and asked the court for their freedom based on a lack of evidence and having no criminal history, meaning convicted. Had other accusations in the past, but no criminal history. Another factor was that they stated that Tristan had a 3-week-old baby and he has yet to see them. So, all right, off topic. Tristan, congratulations. I hope the child and the mother are both healthy and well. All right, that was the humanity part of it. I think everybody should agree to that. Now let's get back to Ms. Glandian's opening statement. So the Tate's defense team at that time of the press conference was waiting for the court's ruling for them to be released. So they were, still hopeful and optimistic. Obviously, this was back in February 1st and it was denied. Now, this was Tina Glandian's moment to pitch the way she viewed the case. And this is what she said. It is well known that the Tate brothers are controversial public personas. But this case is not about public persona and whether you agree with their points or not. This case is about the violation of international human rights and due process of law. And so far, the system has failed. The Tate brothers, who are U.S. citizens, have been in jail for over 30 days without bail and any charges being filed against them. She continued, the investigation, and I quote, the investigation started in April 2022. The fact that there is still no charges as of February 1st should speak volumes of the state of the evidence in the case. The continued detention of the Tate brothers under these circumstances is a violation of international human rights law and the EU guidelines. So despite anybody's viewpoint toward the Tate brothers, everyone should be concerned about this global issue, end quote. Though, of course, she's referring to the global issue of international human rights. She then stated that her firm joined the Romanian legal defense team because she wants to ensure that American citizens are protected while abroad. And she's going to continue fighting for the Tates released. So in my opinion, she did a very good job of shifting the conversation and framing it through the perspective they want. She did this by stating that this is not about public persona or whether you agree with the Tate's point of view. Now, I agree. That is not what this case is about. It's about fucking human trafficking. I think she spun it wrong, and I'm not throwing shade at them. I think by her pointing out the public persona, now, look, that is factored in. Absolutely. You know, their disliked public persona may be the reason why they're getting unfavorable media coverage. I believe that. Or why powerful elites dislike them because of all the criticism the Tate's made of them. I agree with that. But to say that their dislikable public persona fabricated all of these questionable circumstances, I think you're just minimizing what this case is about. It's human trafficking. You're going to want to distance yourself. You want to say you had no part of it. You're going to give all these other reasons. But to kind of try to divert the attention there, it just seemed like a bad play, in my opinion. But the reason why I think she did a bad job in the press conference is because she did a good job in the Piers Morgan's interview. And I know I'm jumping ahead. She was asked directly about that, and she took it head on. And what she did instead is she acknowledged the seriousness of the human trafficking charges, and then she pointed out her client's opposition to these type of charges, how he thought they were horrible, how he thought it should be punishable with the death sentence. I think that was much more powerful to not minimize the charges at hand. Now, the idea of international human rights law violations, we got to take a little bit of a side here. So let's look at the topic of international human rights law. Is she applying U.S. standards to Romanian law? Well, let's first look at the fact that she's being coined as an international rights lawyer. Now, when I went through her website, there is the only mention of her having any background or history of international human rights was her participation in a summer law program in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she took courses in international and comparative law and international protection of human rights. The rest of her profile says she's a very prominent criminal defense attorney. It says that she has a lot of civil litigation experience, class action lawsuits, serious personal injury, wrongful death, employment law, police misconduct, appellant law. You know what wasn't mentioned or highlighted in her law firm's profile? Being an international rights advocate or practitioner. Now, I am not saying she doesn't have a background in this. I'm not saying that a lot of her cases that she's tried or has worked on, I don't have that information. But if her law firm and her profile, which is kind of like your electronic business card, doesn't really mention that being your forte, I just have to wonder, is the international human rights law violation more of a soundbite? Or is this her passion and something she knows well about? Now, as an aside, this idea of whether it was an international human rights law violation, I think there's an excellent discussion, or I should say debate, between a British legal expert and a blue-haired guy named Destiny on the Just Pearly podcast. It's 2 hours long. It happened about 2 weeks ago. It was fantastic. They went over that in detail. I'll give you just the bullet points and my thoughts. So Tina Glandian and Bruce Rivers cite American jurisprudence standards of law enforcement having to charge a person within 48 hours to 72 hours of their arrest. Otherwise, they would be released. And that's in comparison to the Romanian standard of preventive detentions, which you can do that up to 180 days. So at this point in time, Tate was facing up to 60 days. I think it's kind of a silly comparison. Here's ultimately what they're doing and why I know I'm right is in later at the very end when Tina Glandian went on the Patrick Bet Davis podcast, she said as much. The Romanian laws institute this preventative detention. There should be cases in the EU appealing this. There should be stuff basically at higher court levels trying to resolve this issue. To argue this point in front of the current judge who's just looking whether or not to approve or deny the appeal for the preventive detention, it's kind of out of that judge's hands. It's the wrong forum. They don't have jurisdiction to determine whether it's constitutional or not to have a preventative detention. They can just decide whether or not it should be granted. So think about it this way. You go to Starbucks and you order something and they make a mistake. They can fix it, right? That's within their wheelhouse. Now, if you go to Starbucks and you have an issue with an app or the ingredients that they have, and you tell the barista behind them, they're going to say, take it to corporate. This is kind of the situation. Tina Glandian legal defense team is making a corporate argument to the barista. That's the way I see it. And Tina Glandian kind of doesn't say it that way, but kind of agrees. Okay. So first question in the press conference, they ask, Andrew Tate has multiple passports, and they discuss his international rights law a little bit more. And Tina Glandian explains the difference between pre-trial detention and how the Tates are experiencing preventative detention, and that for a preventative detention, it should be the least restrictive means possible or alternates imposed. So in this situation, she's like, bail, monitor, take their passports, house arrest. You should try to do those type of things. But they're using the most aggressive forms or the harshest sanctions imposed by placing them in jail. And so she says this is unwarranted. They are not a flight risk. And she makes an excellent argument. As an attorney, I really respected this. She said they were investigated back in April. That's when, they got raided. If they were flight risk, they would have taken off then. But they didn't. They stuck around. They have their family here. They have their businesses here. They're not a flight risk. It is an excellent, excellent argument. And I think it doesn't matter because this is a different situation. Before the Tates explained it away, there was an interview with Andrew Tate where he says, law enforcement came. He showed them the CCTV. They said, okay, thank you. That seemed to be it. Now, the Tates know that they're coming after him, whether just or unjust. They know that law enforcement is on a fishing expedition. They know they're going to try their damnedest to put these guys away. It's a much different situation. And we also know that the Tates have connections to a lot of unsavory people, a lot of good people, but a lot of unsavory people. They have loyal followers, fans, friends who would do anything for these guys. They have the means, and I think they have property in places where Romania does not have jurisdiction. It's kind of different. Not saying they're guilty. I'm not saying they're not a flight risk, but the idea is you are measuring risk, not certainty, risk, and is up to a judge through their experience, through their knowledge, through the advice of other judges and their experience to making a determination whether the Tates are flight risk, and these judges believe they are. End of the story. If you disagree, go to law school, become a judge. I don't know what to tell you. This is in the hand of the judges, just like in a UFC fight. Don't leave it up to the judges. It is what it is, the decision that you get. And one last thing about the Tates being a flight risk. If you're still holding on to the idea that they were not a flight risk, on February 25th, 2023, the newspaper The U.S. Sun reported that interceptions were made by the Court of Appeals suggesting that the Tates were planning to flee to Dubai. It claims that the Tates stated, and I quote, "See if they need any information, but also make it clear that if we win, I'll go straight to Dubai and won't be able to make it on Friday," end quote. Then he said, and I quote, "And if I owe them any money, I'll pay it with a deposit or something like that," end quote. Now, the Tates were referring to the appeal of the second preventive detention back on February 1st. So the game plan was, if they were to win the appeal, be released on house arrest or whatever it was, they were planning on leaving to Dubai. And these interceptions were allegedly conversations between them and their attorney while in prison. And of course, those phone calls were tape recorded. So anyone who is convinced that the Tates would not be a flight risk, I would just point them to this evidence and say they were a risk. Not a guarantee, but a risk. Okay, so next thing. Tina Glandian points out there is a presumption of innocence once charges are filed, but here no charges have been filed. Now, I kept on thinking incorrectly that Tina Glandian was just pulling over something from the US legal system and importing it into the Romanian legal system. And I was incorrect. She is correct. There is a presumption of innocence in the Romanian legal system. And I found an article, I'll cite it. It says, and I quote, "The contemporary criminal procedural doctrine treats the presumption of innocence both as a procedural guarantee enjoyed by prosecuted or tried persons, but also as a reflection of their constitutionally protected fundamental right, which is under the Romanian constitution, until the judgment of conviction remains final, the person is considered innocent." And the citation is to the Romanian Constitution, Article 23, paragraph 11. So, absolutely innocent until proven guilty. Now, the journalist had a follow-up question, and they asked, "Can you tell us the reasons the judges cited as to why the Tate's release from detention was denied?" Now, Ms. Glandian said, and I quote, "We feel like there are outside pressures not based on the actual evidence." She states that she cannot discuss further what the outside influences are because of an ongoing investigation, end quote. Now, I agree with her. As an attorney, you should not be commenting on ongoing investigations. However, she completely sidestepped known facts that are in this case. And I would like to jog her memory that in January 10th, 2023, there was a New York Post article that cited, and we talked about this in part one of this discussion. The article quoted a document explaining the judge's motivation for granting the first preventative detention. And the judge said, and I quote, "The possibility of them," meaning the Tates, "evading investigation cannot be ignored," end quote. And that they could, and I quote, "leave Romania and settle in countries that do not allow extradition," end quote. So Ms. Glandia dodged a good one, but we do know the judge's reasons for denying it, and it's not favorable to her clients. So of course she shouldn't be the first one to point that out. Okay, third question was surrounding the accusations leading to the U.S. Embassy contacting the Romanian law enforcement. Ms. Glandia claims that any evidence in the public domain is exculpatory for the Tates. Now, exculpatory means evidence that is favorable to the accused. It kind of exonerates them from any guilt. I think in this situation, what she's talking about is back in April, there was claims by the U.S. Embassy, because somebody called them and said that there were, I believe, 2 American females that were being held against their will at the Tate's compound. Well, Andrew Tate, and it's come out from a number of sources that there was CCTV at that compound property, and it showed the women were free to leave. Specifically, I believe they went out to go get pizza and pick it up from the driver. So that would be the evidence in the public domain that would be exculpatory for that accusation. Now, the new ones, I don't know. Okay, let's move on to the next question. She was asked about girls having Tate tattoos. She really didn't address that one, kind of sidestepped it. They asked her if Ms. Glandian was retained directly by the Tate brothers. She said yes. The next sixth question was, during the first detention hearing, the prosecutor stated that Tate brothers can apply psychological pressures on the victims. And what was her opinion on that? Ms. Glandian stated that despite this claim and the long investigation, there is still insufficient evidence to issue formal charges. Thus, if that accusation was true, charges should have already been issued. It's a really great point. Ms. Glandia points out that the Tates not having multiple complaints or allegations against them for bad behavior is indicative of them not behaving that way, especially because they are public figures and that public figures are more prone to having complaints and allegations logged against them. I think this is a great framing. She's essentially saying, because of a lot of frivolous lawsuits and pseudo extortion against rich and famous people, a lot of people are inclined to make accusations against the Tates, maybe bring up a lawsuit and get paid to leave. I mean, that happens a lot. And so she's kind of putting in that doubt or saying, are these girls really telling the truth? Is this frivolous? And Ms. Glandian played this wisely because later there was WhatsApp chat logs between 2 women that kind of raised this issue, pointed it out. It kind of sounded like they were lying to Tate and setting him up. Now, there's controversy about this, and Bruce Rivers talks about it in detail. We'll go into that in part 3, but that is great framing to defending your client on that one. Okay, next one. What are your opinions based on U.S. or Romanian law? Of course, she says she's working with the Romanian legal defense team, and everything is based on Romanian law. Okay, so that is it for the press conference. Now let's go to the Piers Morgan show. Okay, I'm going to play for you the very first question because I thought it was fantastic. The question and her answer, and it gave us a lot of information. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we are going to listen to it together. And here we go.
Plus, joining me now is the lawyer for the Tate brothers, Tina Glandian, who is in Romania. Well, welcome to you, Ms. Glandian. I really appreciate you joining me. Where are we with this case? It seems every now and again this pops up back on television with them being remanded for further time. How long can that process continue before a charging decision is made?
Under Romanian law, they have up to 180 days, which is in 30-day increments. So every time there's a 30-day detention order, they're allowed to renew their request and have it extended for an additional 30 days, but not to exceed 180 days.
Okay. You've taken on this case. Andrew Tate has been repeatedly bellowing his innocence as he's been led in and out of these court hearings and so on. Do you believe them? Do you believe that he and his brother are innocent?
At this point, Piers, they've had this investigation going since April. We're now February, and there are not even charges filed against them. So this is a huge injustice the way we see it. They should not be detained at this point. We think it's now crossed over to the point where it's violating international human rights law, because the deprivation of your liberty pre-trial is the most severe form of punishment a state can impose. And that's what they've done in this case. And they've had a very lengthy investigation with the government's resources. They've been analyzing and looking at all of their devices since April when they seized everything. And here we are, February, and charges aren't filed. So I think there's absolutely no evidence that's been presented. And that's our position.
All right, so that first question gave us some fantastic insight, and we all know that by now. Romanian law states that the brothers can be remanded to preventive detention for up to 180 days. The preventive detention must be requested in 30-day increments. So every time there is a detention order, the prosecutors can renew their request for an additional 30 days, but only at a maximum of 180 days. So that's how it's going to play out, 30-day increments. Now, Piers Morgan then follows up a fantastic question with probably one of the dumbest questions I think he could have asked. He asked a defense attorney if they believed their client was innocent. Now, I like Piers Morgan. I think he's fantastic at his job. It sounds like a really hard-hitting question from a journalist, but it's really silly. And she didn't even address the question. She just kind of bypassed that. And I'll get back to that. But then she does a fantastic job. She, again, shifts the conversation back to human right violations because of the deprivation of liberty. Pretrial without charges is the most severe form of punishment a state can impose. And again, argues that it's a violation. Okay, we've already discussed that. Now, let's get back to why there's a goddamn silly question. And I got to do it through analogy. Unfortunately for you, I just watched Game of Thrones. It's a perfect analogy. So in the show Game of Thrones, there is this term, sellsword. And the most prominent sellsword means to literally sell your sword, essentially be a mercenary, is Bronn. And Bronn worked for the Lannisters. He worked primarily for Tyrion in the beginning, then Jaime, Cersei. They're all siblings. They're all fighting for power. They were for each other, against each other, backstabbing each other, helping the other one escape, right? So there's this back and forth thing. Now, in asking an attorney whether they think their client is guilty, the only proper response, you got to look to The Rock when he was at WWE. And that is, it doesn't matter what they think. It matters what they've been hired and contracted to do, just like a sellsword. So back in Game of Thrones, Bronn was the bodyguard of Tyrion. He helped him out. He went to battle for him. Then he went to help out Jaime fight his battles. And then the dragons came and he said, oh, fuck that. I'm out. Right? And then he worked for Cersei, who told him to kill the brothers. And he said, oh, I like the brothers, so I'm going to let them know I'm going to kill them. But who's going to give me the castle and the pretty wife? Oh, you're going to take it away? You're a bastard. Okay, now you're going to give me a prettier wife and a bigger castle. I'll work for you again. It just shows that there is essentially no morality there. Your morals are not factored in. I guess they're factored in when you take the client or you take the case, but your morals are for hire at any point. And that's just the nature of an attorney. Now, I'm not saying all attorneys are soulless and they'll sell their mother for a nickel. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying if you put yourself in that situation, you're going to have clients hire you that you like, clients that hire you that you don't like. You have the option to walk away from work, but then you're going to lose out on a lot of money. So it is a weird situation. And then if you ask them, do you think that they're guilty? for one, it doesn't matter. And two, is she going to say yes? Is she going to say no? I mean, obviously, that's what she paid to do. And I think it just kind of highlights I think here's what Piers was actually trying to say. You, as an educated, intelligent female, how do you feel representing these guys? I'm assuming you think they're not guilty for you to be able to represent them. And at a personal level, I'm sure that can be answered, but at a professional level, dumbest question you can ask them. So, all right, next, let's move on. Piers asks another fantastic question. He says that it was the possession of any of the items seized by the police, the monies, the car, the weapons. Were those crimes in it of themselves? And Miss Glandian replies, not to her knowledge. Then Piers asks a very specific question about the nature of the allegations and the released recordings of Andrew Tate. And I'm going to go ahead and play that for you. So let me get that queued up. But while I'm queuing it up, let me tell you, you are definitely going to want to tune into our part 3. But when I specifically talk about Bruce Rivers, because I'm going to talk about the mindset of a criminal defense attorney and give you guys some fun stories of things that I saw firsthand that made my mouth, or overheard firsthand that made my mouth drop. And specifically, I'm going to apply it a little bit to Tina Glandian, but mostly to Bruce Rivers. So, all right, let's go to the next part of the conversation. I will share my screen so you guys can hear it, Miss Glandian's response.
But you do accept, of course, that if the women who've come forward here as part of the investigation, if they're telling the truth, these are very serious allegations against your clients, which could lead to charging. And if it led to charging, could lead potentially to long prison sentences if found guilty.
Certainly the crimes at issue are very serious crimes. And I think, Piers, actually, it was on your show when you interviewed Tate several months ago. He made very strong statements about his position on rape, and he condemned rape, and he said it was disgusting, I'm pretty sure the word he used, and he said he thought that somebody who does that deserves the death penalty. So there's no question that these are serious charges, and even in his own words, they're very serious charges. There just isn't any evidence that they committed these crimes.
But we've also had tapes which have emerged in the last few weeks of him talking about rape to a woman in a pretty unsavory manner. So what is your response to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. You said what surfaced?
There have been various tapes have surfaced in part of media investigations in the last few weeks, including Andrew Tate talking about rape to a woman in a pretty unsavory manner. So what would your reaction be to that?
First of all, I think the authenticity of anything that is presented through the media as opposed to turned over to the defense needs to be questioned, because material is edited and it's easily manipulated. So first, I would say that. Secondly, I don't think certain text messages, I'm not here to judge or to talk to people's desires or fetishes, but certainly somebody could easily set someone up by saying they have certain fantasies, they want certain things done to them or said to them. And so there's a lot that goes into, you can't take a text message out of context. You first have to know, first of all, the entire context of it and what the background is. There needs to be explanation. So I think you have to keep all of that in mind when you're seeing something in the media.
All right. So I think Tina Glandian made a fantastic point, and that is when evidence is leaked, and it comes out from the media instead of an authenticated source during a judicial proceeding or process, it should be looked at skeptically. Now, here's the reason why. Somebody just leaks it out in public to the media. You don't know how it's been edited. You don't have a chance to challenge it. But if evidence is presented inside of a courtroom, then during that judicial proceeding or process, the defense would have an opportunity to have their own experts review and test the veracity of the evidence. And in other words, you get to cross-examine it. You get to get the tape or the text in its entirety, hand it to your team, let them pick it apart, see if there's anything wrong. Because if you're just looking at the media, I mean, like or hate Trump, what the media did when cutting and editing a lot of his interviews, you can make somebody sound or say things that are taken out of context. Now, you might hate Trump, you might hate the Tates, but you got to understand with this current technology, things should be verified, especially if it's going to be used as evidence in a criminal trial. So I think she makes an excellent point that the only truly trustworthy evidence will be that comes out during a judicial proceeding. All right, let's listen to the rest of her interview with Piers.
We do, and we have to keep in mind also the judge's reasoning for all this. They explained on the 20th of January that they viewed the particular dangerousness of the defendants and their capacity to identify victims with increased vulnerability in search of better life opportunities. So all of this has to be taken into account. But it goes on, and as you rightly say, at the moment, there have been no charges against your clients. And until or if that point arrives, we're in a world of allegation, not actual charges.
Correct. And right now, exactly, there's a presumption of innocence that every accused has, and that attaches from the time you're even charged. And here, we're not even there. They haven't even charged them with crimes. So any sort of comments as to their alleged dangerousness, there's no evidence of that. There isn't even a presumption of that. They need to be presumed innocent, and that hasn't happened in this case. There's really a lack of evidence, and they are being detained unlawfully at this point.
Tina Glandian, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, so I think that was a great interview by her. Let's move to the next thing. February 1st, the Tates basically lost their appeal. February 2nd, the Daily Mail came out with an article discussing the Bucharest Court of Appeals ruling to deny the Tates appeal and how a psychologist report of two of the Tates' former employees factored into that ruling. This was very interesting. I didn't see this one coming. So apparently there were two women who claimed to have voluntarily worked for the Tates. These women denied being trafficked or harmed by the Tate brothers in any way. A clinical psychologist performed an assessment of these two women. The resulting psychological report was used as extrajudicial evidence by the Bucharest Court of Appeals. Okay, so what's extrajudicial evidence? Cornell Law School defines extrajudicial evidence as something that has occurred outside of or without the authorization of a judicial system. As such, it might not follow proper legal procedures or might not carry adequate legal authority. So kind of what Ms. Glandian was talking about before. Now let's give you examples of extrajudicial statements. That would be something said outside of the courtroom. Such a statement would need to be qualified under a hearsay rule to be entered as evidence in court proceedings. Another example is extrajudicial punishment would be punishment administered by the state actor without due process of the law. Okay, so in other words, evidence that comes through the court is essentially allowed to be challenged. And then what comes through after the challenge, that's authenticated. It's tested evidence. So this psychologist report was not given to the defense. They were not allowed to get their own experts. They were not allowed to review it, poke holes in it, raise questions about it. So the judges had to just take the psychologist report at its face value, knowing that it did not go through those steps. Okay, so what did the report say? In summary, the psychologist report concluded that the women did not understand that they were enslaved and had been brainwashed. Holy shit. All right, I'm going to read you part of this article. And I quote, "The magistrates took the clinical psychologist report into account and ruled that they," meaning the two females, "did not speak knowingly and had been brainwashed through their exploitation. The court said this was due to the brothers' recruitment process of making their alleged victims," and I quote, "fall in love with them, where they falsely claimed to want a relationship or marriage," end quote. So because of that report, the Romanian court ruled, and I quote, "although the named two women, both in the statements given before the criminal investigation bodies as witnesses and through their authenticated statements given before the notary and submitted by the defense to the case file, denied any form of exploitation on the part of the four defendants, and the collegial panel of rights and freedoms appreciates that this statement do not reflect reality," end quote. Again, I quote, "It is known that in the case of the lover boy or by falling in love recruitment method, the victims of human trafficking do not always recognize the fact that they were enslaved and exploited and do not cooperate with the judicial bodies attesting to the idea that these activities were carried out voluntarily." So, I mean, that makes things really tricky. If the women say that they're not victims, if they say they consented, a psychologist can determine that these women were brainwashed and don't understand what they're saying. Is that true? Is that possible? We know of the Stockholm Syndrome. It's true, and it's possible, and you may not like that fact. I'm not saying that's what happened here. The WhatsApp chat of the two women would defend your argument that that's not what happened here. I completely understand. What I'm trying to point out to you is that the Tates put themselves in a shitty position. I don't think that the courts or the psychologists are creating new rules. Now, are they playing with the rules? I don't know. That's yet to be determined. But that is a bad spot to be in, where there is probably other cases, other situations where women were brainwashed in a lover boy method, and that can now be applied or extrapolated to the Tates case. That is not good. Okay, so let's specifically look at the argument that these women cannot recognize they were exploited. The prosecutors directly respond to this. And I quote, prosecutors claim the brothers lured women into the studio back in April 2022, where they were sexually exploited through acts of physical violence and mental coercion, through intimidation, constant supervision, control, and the invocation of alleged debts, and made to produce and share pornographic materials. Okay, so they're not just pulling stuff out of the ether now. They're citing how these women were exploited, how they were controlled, and how they were brainwashed through physical violence, mental coercion, such as intimidation, constant supervision, control, invocation of alleged debts. I mean, that's how you traffic people. So, goddamn, this is tricky. And that was from a Daily Mail UK court. All right, then we got the WhatsApp chats on February 15th. I'm going to go into them later. Very important. I'm not trying to bypass it. We will cover it when I talk about the Bruce Rivers. All right, next, the BBC article where Tate threatened the legal action to the accuser. Here is the only thing I'm going to say. It sounds pretty salacious. It sounds like he's trying to quiet or chill an accuser, meaning get them to back down. Somebody pointed out this was well within his rights of filing a defamation case, and this was also before charges were brought. So keep that in mind. It wasn't charges were brought and then he launched this to try to quiet somebody. All right, February 21st, Bucharest granted the prosecutor's plea for the Tate brothers to remain in custody another 30 days. The women were let out on bail. That was a second preventive detention. Bruce Rivers talks about whether these girls are flipped or not. We'll do that in the next one. Patrick Bet-Davis had another interview with Tina Glandian. We can cover that real quick. But then I want to point out that on yesterday, February 27th, rejected the Tate's appeals for the preventative detention, and the two women were ordered back into detention. All right, so let's just rip through this last interview on the Patrick Bet-Davis podcast of Tina Glandian. Okay, so let me point out a couple things. Very interesting. He asked Miss Glandian if she was representing all four people. She said no, just the Tate brothers. Then he asked a follow-up question, are you working with the girls' attorneys? She said not necessarily working together, but everyone has a consistent defense of no wrongdoing occurred by the parties being detained. That was very interesting to me. I could argue at both sides. Hey, everybody's looking out for their own interests, or kind of like in doing an estate plan with two married couples. Technically, you have both have separate properties, so you have interests that are aligned and interests that are separate of each other. And so the cleanest way is for you to get your own attorney. Now, it's not practical necessarily. So in here, there is a good legal argument that the girls may want to have their own attorneys, not because they want to flip, but because you got to explain things a little bit different. They might not be charged with the same things. They have different considerations when developing their legal defense. Now, Patrick Bet-Davis followed this up with another question. Miss Glandian, are you concerned of these girls flipping? And Miss Glandian said, no. If everybody tells the truth, the Tates aren't guilty of anything. And if anybody lies, there are a voluminous documentary evidence, meaning just a lot of documents out there. And this was about the electronic communications between Tates and the girls. And that will undercut any lies anybody will tell. So essentially, when the truth comes out, everybody's going to be fine. And it is the Tates' last concern about these girls flipping or cutting a deal with the government. So that was her perspective on that. Bruce Rivers has a different perspective, but that was Miss Glandian's. All right. Then Patrick Bet-Davis asked her involvement in the Romanian case, and she essentially said that she appeared at the appeals at the Bucharest court. She has never been able to see the Tates in prison. She has never been able to visit her clients, and that the decision to allow her to see her clients is left up with the prosecutor. And as of February 24th, she has not been able to see. Now, personally, that's very suspect to me. Maybe because I'm an attorney, maybe because I'm an American attorney. I'm biased. if you go check out that Just Pearly debate about this, they go into it in detail. And I have to agree with the legal expert on that one that you should be able to see your attorney in some form. Okay. Then she confirmed that the Tates do not have access to their social media. She said, and this is what I alluded to, that the Romanian preventive arrest procedure, if the court continues to grant the preventative detention request up to 180 days, and I quote, there is nothing the legal defense team can do, end quote. Even if it is an international human rights violation, the judge granting these preventative arrest detentions, they can't make a determination whether this should be thrown out because it's a violation. She needs to file an appeal at a different court that'll probably take a couple years to go through. You should do it if you truly care about Americans abroad, if you truly care about justice being done, go file that appeal. But in the current court you're with, I'm not sure it's a court of equity, which means fairness, and they can even touch that issue. And when she states that there's nothing that the legal defense team can do, that's what she's admitting to me. Okay, she said that the investigation will not yield any evidence to support the current allegations. Thus, if the investigation is nothing more than a fishing expedition to try to uncover new crimes or other charges. So she's confident that her clients will not be charged or found guilty of the current charges or allegations. Well, there's no charges yet, but the current allegations. So she thinks this is a fishing expedition to find new ones. Okay. Next, she acknowledges that law enforcement has seized a large amount of the Tates' assets, and she speculates that this was probably done to put more pressure on the Tates. He asked her specifically about the WhatsApp messages from the two girls going back and forth and how they kind of admissions of lying, manipulating, compromising the Tates, and she said she couldn't comment on that. And then everything else was kind of stuff we already talked about. So again, check the links for everything. I know I talked real fast. I know this is a little bit longer than I wanted to. Please join us for part 3 where I'm going to go off. All right. Thank you guys. And again, lastly, if you are willing to listen, we are willing to talk. Catch you later. Bye. That's it. That's our show. Please join me for part 3 of this conversation where I will be discussing Andrew Tate versus the criminal defense attorney, Bruce Rivers. Please do us a favor and like, subscribe, share this podcast so we can get some traction. Once I get around to it, check us out on our socials. Combative Nerds on Patreon, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You know the deal. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you next episode.